Mike with True American Craftsman, and in today's video, we're going to be going over how to build these hexagon shelves. So with these shelves, the only thing you really need to know is the number 30. And that's because every single one of these cuts, this one, this one, this one, this one, all of them in these shelves is cut with the 30-degree angle. So as long as you remember the number 30, you're good to go. You can make them in a variety of styles. So like this one here is my favorite. It's just super clean, really easy. Just two boards, 30-degree angles all around. And they're a lot wider, so you can showcase larger items as compared to the hippie shelf, or that's what I call that anyway. With the multiple angles, you can put like my wife does the doTERRA essential oils, so she puts all those in these. This one here in the video is going to be a 6-inch cut, and you can also make them larger. So these are 10-inch boards, but they're still same 30-degree angle. This one's a real popular one, the 10-inch with the cool hippie design. And then this is another nice one. It's got the bar down the middle. You can put real tall objects here. You can really design them any which way. But hey, if you're ready, let's get into it. So for these shelves, I just used some common board that I got at Home Depot, and I took it over to the miter saw and squared off the edges. From there, I took my tape measure and measured out 6 pieces at 7 inches each. And it's important to remember the blade width. Make sure you add that in your measurements. Once I had the main section of my board ready, I took it over to the table saw, set the blade adjustment to the around 3/4 of an inch high, and then ripped the board down to 3.25 inches. This is going to be the depth of our shelf. From there, I took it back over to the miter and started cutting the pieces down to size. Now essentially you could do your angle cuts here with the miter and skip this step entirely, but I do the straight cuts here on the miter and then take it over to the table saw for all my angled cuts. I set the angle of my table saw to 30 degrees and then set a stop block up on my miter gauge to make sure that all the boards are cut at the same length. Setting up a stop block will help keep consistent angled cuts throughout this piece. After all the angle cuts are done, I take out the orbital sander and hit each piece with a preliminary sanding of 120 grit paper. I then switch it out and do 220 grit because it's a lot easier to sand it as they're in individual pieces than as a whole. Once the orbital sanding is done, I take a hand sanding to each piece with 320 grit sandpaper. This really helps clean up those edges, which are going to be the face of your hexagon shelf. And once all the sanding's done, I do a quick test fit to make sure all the angles line up nice. After that, it's time for glue up. So I take some painter's tape and put it on what will be outside of the shelves. And I line them all up, make sure the tape goes right along the edges, because that's what we're going to use to create the hexagon shape. Once all the tape is on, I'll flip the boards over and then take Titebond 2 wood glue and hit each of the edges. Just remember when you're gluing up end grain is that the edges really soak in wood glue, so you might have to use a little extra here. Once the glue is set, we will slowly roll the pieces together and create that awesome hexagonal form. So at this point, I'll take a bunch of extra tape and hit it around the edges to make sure it's nice and secure, and then I'll go ahead and use a ratchet strap to add a little bit more pressure onto the hexagon so the glue holds. Right here you'll see an extra little piece of oak that I put in just to help protect the box from the ratchet strap. After letting the glue dry for a few hours, I'll take the orbital sander with some 220 grit sandpaper and just hit the corners and edges to clean off any glue that might have spilled out. At this point, we could start measuring for the inserted pieces. I'll take some scrap wood and I'll measure out 12 1/8 inches, which is going to be the center from side to side for this hexagon shelf. After cutting it to length with the miter saw, I take it over to the table saw and measure 3 1/4 inches for the width. That's the same width that we used for the hexagon shelves to begin with. Once I have the proper width, I again set the gauge to 30 degrees on the table saw and then hit both edges with that 30-degree angle cut. For this board, it's important to remember that both angle cuts that you're making on each edge are going to be on the same side of the board. That way it sits flush, just like this, in the center of the hexagon. To attach this board to the shelf, I'll be using Starbond's accelerator with the medium thick clear adhesive. I'll have a link down in the description below for these, but it dries super quick and it makes the process go a lot faster. Of course, you could just use wood glue if that's all you have. So now it's onto the mini shelves. I'll find an area on the hexagon shelf where I want the mini shelf to sit. And then I find the center, and from the edge to the center is the length of the board that I'm going to cut. So again, I take it to the table saw and cut 3/4 inch wide, and take it over to the miter saw. And for this shelf specifically, I'm doing a 4-inch length because it's 8 inches across from the section that I want it to be at. I cut 2 boards at 4 inches, one for the top, one for the bottom, and then again set the table saw at 30 degrees and hit all the edges with 30-degree angles. Again, keeping the angles on the same side. To set these in place, I used the same Starbond adhesive and then took the 16 gauge brad nailer and put a couple nails into each side. The only issue I had was I didn't let the glue settle all the way, so it actually kicked the board off the main shelf. So I had to rip it off, rip the nails out, and restart with that board. So instead of doing a bunch of math for the next section, I just line up the board with where I want to put it, and then use my pencil to mark on the board itself what the angle is going to look like. Again, it's going to be a 30-degree angle, but it's where it's going to go on this piece that matters. Then I'll take my square and make sure that the lines are drawn correctly so I know where to line up my table saw blade. Now for this piece, the angles on the board are actually going to be on the opposite side, so just remember this, you have to flip the board to cut the angles. I checked to make sure the pieces fit nice and snug, then threw on some more adhesive and let them sit for a little bit. After that, I took some 1 1/4 16 gauge brad nails and added a couple more nails to each of the shelf sections, just to make sure that it's secure. After taking the tape off, I used my pencil and mark each of the boards on the outside and on the edges. This is going to show me where I need to sand and where I have already sanded. To give it a nice clean flat look, I use Minwax wood filler and fill in any gaps between the shelving. Once the wood filler is applied, I'll let it sit and dry for about an hour or so before coming back and sanding. I'll then put some 220 grit sandpaper on the orbital sander and go over the sides and edges to remove any wood filler. For this shelf, I also put some wood filler on the brad nails on the sides, so I went around and sanded them off also. And then I went back through with the 320 grit sandpaper just to get rid of any circle marks that may have been left behind from the orbital sander. Once all the sanding's finished, I used the Minwax pre-stain conditioner and put it all over the hexagon shelf. This helps deter or avoid any blotchiness when staining. For this shelf, I went with Minwax's Jacobine color stain. It's an oil-based stain, and I think the brown tone really makes these shelves pop. I apply the stain with a clean, dry cloth, and then I go back through once I'm finished putting the first coat on, and I wipe off any excess so that the blotchiness is deterred. This is probably the toughest part of this whole project, is getting the stain in all the little corners, so just take your time and make sure you do it right. To get a nice smooth satin finish, I'm using my homemade Patriot furniture finish. It's going to be hitting the site soon, and it's a blend of paraffin wax, beeswax, and mineral oil. You just apply it with a clean, dry cloth. A little bit does go a long way, and let it dry for at least an hour. Once it's dried, go back through with another cloth and buff off any excess wax. So I like to have these shelves sit flush against the wall, so I use the keyhole bit with my palm router and add 2 keyholes approximately 4 inches apart on the top of the shelf. Now you don't have to do this specifically if you don't have it. You can use a D-ring or alligator teeth, but I think having it flush against the wall makes it look a lot cleaner. And it's as simple as adding 2 screws into your wall and then just having it sit directly on top of them. y'all, well, I hope you enjoyed the video. These hexagon shelves are super easy to make, just that 30-degree angle. That's all you need to remember, 30 degrees. But you can make a bunch of different designs, like the ones that I have listed out here. I found all these designs on Pinterest. It was really easy to search for them. So you can either, copy these or make some up on your own. I'll have these all posted on my Instagram, True American Craftsman, and also on my website, trueamericancraftsman.com. I'll have these getting ready for sale. So if you want some more inspiration, go ahead and head over to one of those sites and check them out. But hey, if you like this video, go and hit that like button for me, and if you want to see more like it in the future, hit subscribe.